Okay, so we have made it to chapter 7 in Nagel's little book titled What Does It All Mean? And this chapter is called Right and Wrong. But I think this chapter is really focused on what's known as metaethics. So I'll try to explain that for you here in a minute. But our main question is what makes something right or wrong? Now, I do want to warn you that there's quite a bit of information that's going to be kind of crammed into the following 10 different lectures. So my recommendation is to pace yourself. There's a lot of information to get through. So our question, like I said, was what makes something right or wrong? And that's a meta-ethical question. Metaethics is essentially the study of the source of morality or what, like I said, what makes something right or wrong. But we also have what's known as value theory. Value theory is the study of the good, or we might say the study of what makes a person's life go well. What is well-being? What is the good life? Normative ethics is a study of how the world ought to be, or how we think that the world should be, rather than a description of how the world is. I think it's helpful to compare normative studies to science. Science describes the way the world is. We go out and make observations, and then we describe what we've seen, right? So normative ethics is different because we're trying to talk about the way that we would like the world to be. So it's a study of theories concerning right conduct. There's a number of different normative theories. Each of these theories use different principles concerning what we ought to do. We are describing the moral duties that we have, what are our obligations in different situations. So for instance, if you want to know whether it's morally permissible to tell a lie in some situation, then we consult our normative theory, and the theory tells us what we should do in that situation. These are supposed to be action guiding. They tell us how we should behave, what obligations we are required to do, right? So it's telling us what morality requires of us. So if you want to know what the right thing to do is, we consult the theory. Applied ethics, however, is the study of ethical theories applied in a real world situation. So we're not just thinking about what the theory says, but we're trying to figure out how the theory gets applied in the world. So for instance, we have examples like abortion, reproductive ethics, euthanasia, bioethics, animal ethics, social political ethics, just war theory, gender and race, sexual relations, and lots of others that we could think of. And this is clearly is not an exhaustive list, and there may be some quibbles about what gets included in a list like this and what shouldn't. But generally, the idea is that we're trying to apply the different principles that that we discuss in our normative theories, or the obligations that we've identified in the normative theories. We're applying those to real world situations. So each of these could be its own class in philosophy. There could be a class in metaethics, class in value theory, class in normative ethics, class in applied ethics. In fact, one of my favorite classes to teach is applied ethics, because we can really dig into these different problems and see what sorts of solutions, if any, we might find. But before we say much more, I want to dig into metaethics in much more detail here. And that's because I think Nagel's chapter is really a chapter that's mostly focused on these sorts of issues. So again, what exactly is metaethics? Metaethics is our attempt to understand the metaphysics, epistemological, semantic, and psychological presuppositions and commitments of moral thought, talk, and practice. I think this is a really nice quote or way to define this branch of moral theory. It comes from the Standard Encyclopedia of Philosophy, so you can take a look at that if you would like. But again, I think this is a nice quote that helps define the branch. So we've got a number of different questions we could ask that I think are meta-ethical questions. For instance, the most basic one is just simply, are there moral facts? This is the sort of question that we're going to be considering as we continue in this module. If so, what is the source and what is the nature of these moral facts? That's a related question. What makes moral claims true or false, assuming that they even are true or false? Are moral standards simply relative to one's culture or one's society? That's a kind of relativism about morality. Are moral judgments nothing more than human sentiment or human taste? Where what we mean here by human taste is sort of our aesthetic preferences rather than the flavor. Or are moral judgments in some sense objective? Are they universal? I think a lot of people assume morality needs to be objective or needs to apply to everyone universally, no matter who you are or what situation you might find yourself in, where you live. Is moral knowledge even possible? Is this something that we can do, or is this something that's just beyond our epistemic ability to understand these sorts of things? And assuming that moral knowledge is in some way possible, how is moral knowledge justified? What exactly justifies our moral claims? What reasons are there to behave morally? Why should I care about morality in the first place? Why should I care about your well being? Why should I even care about my own well being? These are the sorts of questions that we're going to need to consider in this module. But before we move on to the next video, I do want to talk about another distinction that I think is going to be helpful. We might wonder whether there's a real or a substantive difference between what we might call ethics and morality. Are these words interchangeably, or do they refer to different things? I think philosophers disagree about this. Ethics, on the one hand, could be understood as that which deals with the theories or moral principles concerning right and wrong action. So these would be the normative issues that we would consider. I think it's fair to say that we generally assume that moral or ethical knowledge is in some sense possible. If you say that person did something wrong, then you seem to be claiming something that you could say you know about the situation. But nonetheless, it still might seem quasi impersonal, where what we mean by that is we're making an objective observation. If two people see the same crime committed, they're probably both going to agree that it was wrong. So that's quasi impersonal, where it's not just a matter of your own opinion. Now, where most people, I think, would generally assume that ethics is, in some sense, objective or should be applied universally to everyone, morality is a different story. There's both objective and subjective theories of morality. I think this is often a very personal issue. Sometimes people kind of see it as being a matter of their own point of view. But of course, none of this is exhaustive. There's likely many other different ways that we could, distinguish between ethics and morality, different ways to see how these things could come apart. But for our purposes, I'm going to ignore that. I'm just simply going to assume, for the sake of our class here, that there is no substantive difference between ethics and morality. That is, I'm going to be using these words interchangeably. I'm going to be using them as synonyms. Of course, I should say that's with a caveat that some philosophers might reject this. They may disagree with me on this point. Nonetheless, for our class, I will treat these words interchangeably.